And let's hope it works. Test it. Here we go. I think we're gonna start showing up on LinkedIn. Here we go. And let's hope it works.
All right.
Jay, welcome to the show. This is ReThink IT. This is our first live one. And forgive our technical issues, but I'm going to click some speakers off and go from there. All right, Jay, can you hear me okay?
I can.
Well, welcome, my friend. We've known each other for a couple of years now through RFPs and working together on a fairly big project, and getting to know you has been incredible because, CIOs are a rare breed, and to meet somebody that's of a like mind is always wonderful. So welcome to the show, and I hope we can have a little bit of fun today. So Jay Leslie is the CIO at the Cambridge Housing Authority, and Jay, I'll let you introduce yourself a little bit. Tell us about your background and how did you get to this point where you're the CIO of a fairly large public housing agency?
Oh, thank you so much, AV. Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here. It's been a long journey. So I'm one of those, I don't know if you remember, but back in the day, there was this IT column called the Accidental IT Guy. It was like 503CV or something like that, but it referred to nonprofits. And it was one of those things where there was no IT staff, and there's usually a guy or woman or anybody really who just like could basically plug in a stapler. That person became the IT person. So
Right.
Eventually, I didn't go to college for it. I didn't go to grad school for IT or anything like that. I was public policy, sociology, and communications. And here I am in IT, mostly because I was the guy who knew how to plug things in. And over time, you kind of learn. And the reluctance was there, but over time, I really started to enjoy it. It wasn't my original career path, but it's where I am now, and I wouldn't do anything else.
That's awesome. And how did you tell us about the progression though? Like you're the guy that plugs things in. You probably turn things off and on to get things working again. Lots of password resets and things like that. What was the progression? What was the inflection point that you went from, sounds like, help desk to a CIO?
Yeah, well, I guess I started off before I really knew I wanted to do IT. I started off breaking things, like literally. I was an intern way back in the mid '90s at an organization in New York, and I was just always curious about how things worked. So I started messing with their database and messing with the systems, and somehow I took everything offline. And I was kind of like, oh, what's going on here? How am I going to fix this? And long story short, I got it up and running. No one quite knew that I did it, and I was like, oh, that's cool. You got a lot of control here. You start rubbing your hands together like one of those cartoon villains.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that's kind of how it started. And I never really wanted to be an IT leader once I got into IT. I was always an engineer. I was always interested in cybersecurity, even back in the days when no one changed their passwords. I was always the guy who was like, hey, you got to change that. You got to make this a little more secure than it is right now. And I try to show people what pitfalls that get hit. I only became an IT leader really because I got to the point where I wanted to have a lot more influence. I didn't really want to give up playing with the toys, but I wanted to be able to have a little more influence over, not just my shop, but over IT in general, just kind of the general world of technology. And I'm not there yet. I don't know if I'll quite reach that place, but I am management now.
Yeah, well, that's awesome. And working with you has been a pleasure. So let's talk about cybersecurity. It can be a buzzword for our industry today, but it's paramount. Everything we do, like you said, change your passwords, and it's not back in the day. You still have to tell people and have policies in place to get people to do something as basic as that. What is your philosophy towards cybersecurity? How do you think about this at a management high level, and then put it into practice?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, cybersecurity it can be a really heavy lift, especially for a public housing authority or a small to mid-sized organization. My philosophy is to try to make it as easy as possible for people. If you make it simple for them, they'll generally basically do what they're supposed to do. So we have we're very human focused. We focus on end user training. I send out many, many emails a week just based on mostly phishing schemes I find and point out the red flags and stuff like that. And when I say making things easier for people, one of my big initiatives now is passwordless authentication. And it's been a road I've been on for far longer than I thought I'd be on that road. I thought it was going to be a simple matter of, set up some SAML, flip a switch, and it would work. 3 years later, I'm just about to the point where we're almost done. And it's better because when you look at the stats, probably 80% of cybersecurity breaches are just due to phishing. It's just there's no one hacking through firewalls anymore. It happens, but that's usually like nation state actors, and you'd have to be a much bigger target than someone like us. Most attacks generally are from someone stealing a password. So, my thought is that, well, if you get rid of passwords or at least push them so far into the background that no one knows what they are, then that's an 80% gap that's closed for you, and it makes you a lot more secure. And on the user side, no one loves passwords. No one loves changing them. So if you get to the point where it's not a thing for people, it's not something they have to remember or think about, then it just reduces the friction and helps keep the organization safe.
Right. So when you say passwordless, it's not that you don't have a password, right? It's layered with other authentication factors and methods to keep you safe.
Absolutely, yeah. So passwordless, it's a little bit of a misnomer. Behind the scenes, there's generally still a password store, right? You want to keep that as safe as possible. I think the closest we've come to getting rid of passwords is Microsoft on the consumer side is now giving you the option to eliminate passwords for authentication. And the next question there is like, well, how do you authenticate? I have an answer for you. It's one of the things you can use is your phone, right? So they have authenticator apps that you can put on your phone. And what they'll do, and I like the Microsoft implementation a lot because now when I try to access a system, generally I'll get a code pushed out to, or not even a code actually. I'll get a code on my screen, like you'll get like the number 67. And I'll get a ping on my authenticator app and I type in the number 67 and that lets me in. So it's basically the best of multi-factor. It's something I have, my laptop and my phone, and something I know, which is the number that just sent me 67, and that gets you in. There's also other ways. So when we log in at work now, I've pushed CHA toward using a PIN to log in rather than a password. It's a 6-digit PIN. And the question there is like, well, why is that better than a password? And the answer is really, it's really kind of ingenious because the whole IT security community was like really skeptical about a lot of this for a while. But if you're typing in a PIN, it's really connected to your machine, whether it's your phone or your laptop. And that PIN, if it gets phished, is pretty much useless anywhere else. It's not like you can go into a network and log in with my PIN and get anything. It's not going to do anything for you. You need to use the PIN on a registered machine. And another big area for passwordless is biometrics. And I love biometrics. I think it scares people to death in some ways. And I think it's just a matter of education. Even my boss, when I showed him, it's like, hey, look, I can log in with my fingerprint. He's like, oh, I'm not doing that. What if they take my fingerprint? What if my face is, all kinds of things like that. But it's not a worry. And I won't get into the details of why right now, but that's where we're going. And I think it'll be a better world.
Passwordless biometric is your bet. Let's move on to a couple of months ago, last month, I don't know, you posted something on LinkedIn that said, what was it? The IT department's dead, or get rid of it. It wasn't your article. You were sharing it, and you got a lot of grief from the IT community and people that don't understand, like, who's going to reset my password and set up my printer, Jay?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I knew I was going to get a lot of grief. And I read it because it actually made me as angry as the people who read my posts and who were probably most of them didn't really read the article. If they did, they would have realized it was actually saying how important IT people are. But the title of the article was "It's Time to Get Rid of IT Departments" by, I think it was Joe Pepard in the Wall Street Journal back in probably late November. And, I got angry too. I looked at this. I was like, this is a flashback to Nicholas Carr back in the mid 2000s. Does IT really matter? And, the provocative title is very clickbaity. Even back then it was clickbaity because what Carr was talking about was really not does IT really matter. It's that someday soon we're not going to have a closet full of whirring servers and flashing lights. All that stuff would become a commodity that's just out in what's now called the cloud, and that there wouldn't need to be IT people to maintain that hardware. And back then I was a hardware guy. I was an engineer. I was one of the guys who lived in an air-conditioned room pretty much. And I was terrified until I realized that the cloud is actually a really fun place to be. So I kind of made the transition to the cloud. The Joe Papard article was very similar, right? He was saying that, IT departments take a lot of flack for being unresponsive, for being really distant from the core business. And a lot of that can be true. Like, I know when I think of myself, I don't, and I hope no one's listening from housing, but I don't know much about housing policy, right? I'm a
Yeah.
tech guy. So when someone comes in and says, "Hey, I want a report written that shows me, how many vouchers I have and a lot of details about housing," I might know how to get them the information, but I'm not as close to those data as somebody in your department might be.
Hmm.
So what I took away from that article was not that we need to get rid of IT departments. What I got out of it was that the IT department itself should probably be more focused on technology and cybersecurity and things that are really outside the core realm of the business. But there are people like report writers and data scientists and a lot of people who tend to live within the IT department for just lack of a better home for them in the organization. The organization is much better served having people like that close to the departments that are consuming the data and the information and who are doing the analysis. Having them under me, I'll take them, but it's not as useful if it's under like the leased housing director, for example. And the Cambridge Housing Authority, we have a great leased housing director who kind of realized that. And she worked really closely with one of my guys who has since left the organization. He got his skills and went out the door, but he was great. He really understood the business, and he was really an interface between the IT department and leased housing. And this director got a lot of great use out of him, and he loved working with her because I think that he probably felt that she understood his world better than I did in some ways, because he's really an information guy. I'm really a technologist and cloud and cybersecurity guy.
I think that's a great distinction, Jay, is when people think of, our clients mostly also is when they think of IT guys, you should be able to do everything IT. And it's becoming clear, and it's a matter of educating them too, is there's the nuts and bolts, the blinky lights that keep everything secure and working. And then there's, what do you do with all the software and the data that's coming out of it? Big data, another buzzword, right? But it's so critical to understand how to use it. And it's not always up to the IT guys. You're right. You may not be interested in the business of public works or building houses. But someone that's been in that vertical and the function that's responsible for promoting that and asking those questions, it's up to them to figure out how to use the data with support from IT.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think that's what the article was talking about.
Yeah, no, that's exactly it. And I think if people have read that far, they would realize just how important and how much respect the author had for IT people. And the way I see his premise was that we're too important to be locked away in some like department that no one cares about. Our knowledge and expertise should be out there serving the organization, actually on the ground and in the departments where it belongs. And I think, AV, you brought up another point earlier about IT specialization. I think that people see data and IT as the same thing. People see cloud people and hardware people as the same. It's kind of like thinking that your plastic surgeon is the one to call when you're having a heart attack, and
Right.
that's we know that's not true. I think it would be helpful and honestly, this is on us as IT people to better communicate the specialties that are involved and who to call for what issues.
Right. No, great points. I think specialization is important, and keeping an eye on the outcomes. Right. I keep talking about this. What are you trying to get to? And that should dictate who you call and what kind of skill sets you can apply. That brings me to another, hot topic, at least in my world, is how do you modernize systems? A lot of times we get called in because someone bought something, right? We had the money, went out and bought something, now it doesn't work. And I call it going back to eat your vegetables, right? You've eaten all of the fun stuff. Now you got to go do the work. You have to do it. And we are big proponents of process redesign. And I know you are. Not just putting a thing or a system or a software piece in just because it's flashy, just because you could afford it. What do you do when you bring it home? When you install it, it doesn't work. Give me your thoughts on how you see all of that.
Yeah, I mean, I'll give you a good example. It's like, and I'm not a whiz bang flash kind of guy. It's like I'm not reaching for the shiny objects. I really try to think about how people are going to use everything that we implement. And and a good example is we have bots. And this is not a knock on bots. It's a great storage system for files. But we
Mm-hmm.
got bots years ago because there was a thought that we were moving offices, and this was before my time. And our storage, like everything else, should be in the cloud. Problem is, it turns out that our network drives were already in the cloud because they were cloud hosted. So there wasn't really the need for that move. But like you're saying, even were we to make that move, and even were that a good idea, we could have benefited from a lot better process analysis, a lot more thought into how people would actually use bots and whether they even want it. And it turns out that we didn't do any of that, and people didn't really want bots. They never really saw the value in it. And
Mm-hmm.
the end result is that by the time I got to CHA, we're kind of like half on network drives, half on box. Really, no, I think only one department really gave up network drives and really even tried to make full use of box. But we spent a lot of money on licenses. We put a lot of time into trying to get people to see the light. And at some point, I wound up pulling the plug. But the other thing to remember is that once you put technology out there, once you put any tool out there, it's a lot easier to offer it than it is to take it away. So
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
one of my big initiatives for this year is actually rolling back box. But it's the same for anything, right? If you're
Yeah.
changing housing management systems, it's like you want to think about how people are going to use this on the ground and what the real complaints were about the old system, and even do you actually need to change? And I think usually the answer is yes, but if the answer is no, you just have to know how you got to that point and be able to back up that decision.
Yeah, and that's a great example. It's not something that's I mean, it's enterprise wide, but it's the impact of using something like Box would be tremendous while not drawing down the entire organization into an implementation, so to speak, right? But when it comes to large scale enterprise software, like you said, you're changing your ERP system. Um, Thought needs to be put into how that's going to go, and a lot of times, I mean, you have to do the work up front, do the
You
thinking
really
up
do.
front, so you don't have to stumble later on. Um, and with software implementations, especially, it's Wild West out there, right? Especially with public housing. There's the 800-pound gorillas, and then the smaller players that claim to know what they're doing and offer services. But if you don't think through what you're doing and how you want things to improve and operate, how do you know which system is the right one for you? And it's again going back to the box example. Um, what would you think you would have done differently if you had to do it again?
If I were so on the box example, what I would do differently is I wouldn't have gone with it as early. And I say that because what people love about network drives and why people are so attached to them is because you just like click on a drive letter, you save or you open, you get access to things that are in a way that's very familiar. The initial challenge with bots was the idea that it's all in the cloud and there was no direct way to get to your stuff.
Right.
And that terrifies people. And
Mm-hmm.
if you're going to go that route, you have to spend a lot of time explaining why this could be better, and also how do I get to my stuff, which is the most important thing really. It's not that you have this shiny new system out there. It's like, how does this improve or otherwise impact people's work? And if we had waited, there was an answer. Box actually does
Yeah.
now allow you to access drives just like they're part of your standard Windows file system, which is great. But the problem now is so does SharePoint, and SharePoint is
Yeah.
integrating with everything behind the scenes. And again, I'm box agnostic. I'm not anti-box. I try to choose solutions that provide a benefit for people while not being so astronomically far away from how they work anyway. That way it makes the transition easier. And then you can roll out new features later. Like you can offer them, say, hey, you can get this SharePoint file just like your regular file system. And then they get used to that. And oh, by the way, all this stuff is backed up automatically, and you can access your archives and file versioning. All that's there for you. And you gradually sell the benefits as you go, as opposed to just like rip and replace and give them something that they have no idea why the change was made in the first place.
Yeah. So it makes me think of something I said to some of our uh, new staff members at Avera a couple of weeks ago. A lot of this is common sense and logic. I mean, do you really need to get deep into a certain subject matter to understand how processes should flow? I mean, you do it in your daily life. When was the last time you went into a bank or the post office, unless you really had to, right? And you think of that, and then you overlay the tools on top of it. It's not as easy working, when it comes to the public sector, especially cities, counties, to a lesser extent, public housing agencies. Um, how do you keep innovation going within the confines and the constraints that a government agency or a quasi like yours brings to the table?
Yeah, it's not easy for a lot of reasons. Part of it gets back down to processes, and I think, especially to the extent that we're nonprofits, staffs tend to be lean. So you don't have a project management department. There's not like a team of people there to really guide you through bringing something from idea, to fruition and implementation. So what I do is I think very stepwise. I mean, I think about really not the technology, but I think, as you alluded to earlier, I think about the problem we're trying to solve. And, for a good example is a part of, we're doing a Yardi rollout with you now. And, it turns out we needed to buy tablets for people, mobile devices. So, in my head, I'm like, okay, this isn't just tablets and mobile devices. How are we going to manage these things? So we're
Right.
like, okay, well, there's a mobile device management system. Okay, well, how are they going to actually use this device? Which is not just, hand it to them and say you can install anything you want on it. You want to keep it locked down to some extent, and not to the point that it keeps them from doing their jobs, but it keeps them from really stepping on their own feet and hurting themselves by either installing something that shouldn't be there, or doing something that might damage the device or the data. So you have to think about all that. And what I try to do, to get back to your original question, is not take on more than I think we can handle at any one time, and to keep projects on a year by year basis kind of in line. For example, this year is like the year of SharePoint and network driving our organization. And
Mm-hmm.
that ties in nicely with Yardi, because Yardi's document management system ties into SharePoint. So that's kind of all of a piece. They're multiple projects, but they're not like you've got multiple divergent projects where they're so different that your staff need to be pulled in like 1,000 different directions. You're all marching toward the same goal. You're just marching toward the same goal that's kind of defined by the needs of the organization at a given time. Our need right now is to change our housing management system. So anything that can flow along with that is all to the good.
And do you then have a long-term vision, a strategic plan? How are you, outside of reacting to a need, how do you keep track of long-term visions and priorities and projects?
Yeah, so we do have a strategic plan. Yeah, I'm not going to lie and tell you that, yeah, there's this piece of paper there that's got 5 years worth of planning. I don't have that. I don't. But I do have like a general vision of how I think things should go. And I do actually have a plan. So there's no plan. It's just a less formal one. And what I try to do is since I'm an infrastructure guy, we're now a cloud infrastructure. And I'm trying to think of like, where should we be 5, 10 years down the road? And when you look at it, I think 5, 10 years down the road, I don't think land's going to be such a thing anymore. The idea that you go into an office and everything's governed by you logging into a network, the network's going to be irrelevant. So I'm looking at moving towards what they call zero trust infrastructure. And without getting into the weeds of what zero trust is, basically it means you verify everything. So rather than thinking about like the network itself and you're logging into the corporate network, either via VPN or because you're at your desk at work, you're thinking about really identity. It's like making sure that when Jay Leslie logs into his corporate issued laptop, that really is Jay Leslie, because he's using two-factor, because there's conditional access rules set so that, like, for example, you can't log into our systems from anywhere outside the US, Canada, and Sweden. And that's because the only places our staff ever really go to work are US, sometimes Canada, and we have a staff member in Sweden. So if the system sees that, oh, Jay Leslie's logging in from France, unless I change that before I go to France on vacation, I won't be able to check my email. So it's all about identity. It's not about where you are. It's all about you're governing your actual your digital personhood, I guess, for lack of a better term.
Right. You said no trust. I mean, today that means crypto and blockchain and things like that. Do you see, or how quickly do you see the public sector, housing, for example, adopting those kind of technologies in the future? Not just for internal IT management, but um, lots of PII gets handled in agencies like yours. There's a lot of verification of incomes and tax statuses and basically your economic status, because that's what dictates what kind of services you may receive from CHA. Where do you see this your agency or agencies like yours going in the future with blockchain and crypto technologies?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. And, I honestly think we should tread slowly with blockchain. I'm not a huge proponent of it, not because I think there's anything wrong with it. I think that I think it's a great technology that's really waiting for uses. And, I've heard of organizations who've rushed in and said, we're going to just start implementing blockchain-based storage and databases,
Mm-hmm.
and only to find that it's not as efficient as what they were doing. And that's not at all. That's not in any way to say that blockchain isn't relevant or isn't going to play a role. It's that I think as a public organization, as a smaller public organization, nonprofit, we've got a little time to see how things shake out, to see how we could use it. But that said, I believe it's Estonia. It's one of the Baltic nations, I think, is using blockchain for public records.
Yeah.
That's an excellent use of it, right? You've got this, basically self-verified system that can track who's got a driver's license, when it was issued, who got a parking ticket, and when it was paid, things like that. That's really hard to corrupt. So, that's an excellent use of it. But to get there, they have to hire a blockchain team. And in an average housing authority, we're not going to hire a blockchain team. I'd love to. If my executive director's watching this and says, hey, Jay, you've got the budget to do it, I'm on board. But I'm not going to devote any new resources to something like that. I keep up with the technology, but I just realized that that's probably a bridge too far for us right now.
I think that's the case for most of the industry. As far as I'm concerned, it not that it's unproven technology, it's proven. It's just what applications are we going to plug that into in the future is the unknown. What else, Jay? Like what else is going on in the future that you see that'll be applicable to our little universe here?
I see kind of tying on to what I see as the end of the kind of dominance of the LAN and the WAN. I really do see a role. This is a little controversial. I see 5G as being a technology that's really going to transform how we work. And I say that because just like you have your cell phone on you all the time, and that's pretty much, there's really not many places you can go in most major metro areas that you're not going to be covered. I think the way we're going to work probably 5 or 10 years down the road is that most of our devices will be enabled with 5G or something like it. And our identity, and that includes the device itself being registered with the organization, will be a gatekeeper as to who gets what kinds of information. And so I think that's going to play a huge role. On the IT security front, identity is being tackled now. It's like we're all looking at different ways of protecting people's identities and making the authentication process easier. I think an area of concern and an area where we're going to start to need to pay a lot more attention, and it's starting to get there, but it's not quite there yet, is APIs, application programming interface. And I know it's a little technical. Basically what it is with cloud-based systems, each system tends to live in its own cloud. And an API is like a door that allows a connection between that system, hopefully controlled connection between that system and everything outside. So if you wanted to import data from, say, just to use a housing example, from Yardi to Elite, for example, were they both in the cloud? Theoretically, an API would be how you do that data exchange. The problem is that not many of us really understand APIs, myself included. So if you've got something you really don't understand at a mechanical level, then how do you protect it? And right now, I think there's a lot of open doors out there that they're going to start to be exploited unless we figure out a way to bring that to more front of mind for the IT security community.
Very good point. And they're very vendor specific, right? It's not, my understanding is that each vendor has their own API and they can choose what doors to leave open. Is there a scenario where there's a common API for certain industries? I think that's being done in some cases now. But also it brings me to a point where public housing agencies and government sector agencies, you've got a lot of Legos you can play with and put things together to make operations better, to modernize. 5 years ago, I was convinced that SaaS and the cloud, and I still am. I'm just a little disillusioned because through our experience modernizing counties and cities, we've seen that vendors and software that claim to do certain things sort of tend to not back it up with the customer service. And it all comes down to the basics, right? You can have the shiniest thing that you're selling. If you can't back it up with real good customer service, it's going to fail. So I think that too needs to improve in the future as the tech improves, the ability to fit into someone's strategy, to help clients develop a strategy to take advantage of those new and coming technologies, back it up with real customer service. I think that's going to be critical as we go forward.
I think you're absolutely right. And even in areas like, going back to, Google, for example, Google puts out a lot of great products, but there's really often no support. So you could have the best system in the world there, but if you can't figure out how to even get started, what good is it to you? And to some extent, you run into the same things with Microsoft. You hit something like we make great use of SharePoint in a very niche way. If you look at what Microsoft thinks you should do with it, it's like, oh, it can be your basically a base for your website. It can be a place to meet. There's Teams connected to it. You can share data through like network drive like things. But when your average person looks at that, they're like, okay, so you've just basically given me a bunch of tools, but haven't shown me how to use them to build anything useful. And so I guess what I'm saying is that they're tools, not a solution. So I think there's an opportunity opening up for organizations like yours, actually, like Avero, to provide those kinds of solutions, to say, okay, here's this tool set that's a great tool set, and you can do a lot of things with it. What do you need to get done? And which ones of these tools can you bring to bear to have the most impact for you?
That's a great point. I think we've done well with telling you what's out there and what's possible and sort of blue skying it for our clients. But you're right. There may be a chance here to put some Legos together and present it to guys like you that can use it. Jay, if there's nothing else, I don't want to take up the rest of your day, but it's always great talking to you. And one of these days I'll make it up to Boston to hang out in the cold, drink some beers, and catch up again.
Absolutely. I'd recommend that you wait till it gets a little warmer, maybe come up in June, but right now it's pretty cold and icy, and I wouldn't recommend anyone who's used to the warm climes of Tennessee to travel here unless they have to.
I mean, it's in the 30s. I'm telling you, from October to about April, I'm pretty miserable down here. I love living down here, but Boston's a little out of the question.
Yeah, you need to move further south and go to Louisiana or Florida.
No, I'm good. I started in Cleveland, Ohio. I don't know if I tell you that. Cleveland, Ohio, Baltimore, lived in LA, Seattle. This is perfect. I mean, I'll take 1 or 2 snowstorms.
Yep.
A year.
Gotcha. Yeah. Excellent.
All right, Jay.
All right,
I appreciate your time, my friend. Yes, sir. We'll talk soon. Thank you, Jay.
Thank you. Take care.